So we've been talking about affirmative actions and DI in this show for many, many rounds already. So Lyra, today we have a special guest, our friend
Yes.
Xin Ying.
Hi. Hello.
And Xin Ying, you work at university, right, as a
Yeah.
lecturer.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we thought the affirmative action is a very interesting topic for Malaysian
Yeah.
because every time, even when I was in Australia those days, when people talk about this issue in law school, somehow they always knew like Malaysia has practiced affirmative action.
Oh, really?
So
Okay.
even those they, I mean, they know about the ratio kind of thing, but of course, to what extent it is still
Okay.
happening, and some of our stories and experiences from university, I guess that's what we want to talk about. But Lara, let me start with you because 2 years ago we did 2 episodes on affirmative actions, and I mean not quite equivalent, right? I mean the corporate DEI they call it. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So, and because of the Supreme Court case, etc., etc., and then finally we now have a new Trump administration. So, and I think very recently we're just talking just now how President Trump was threatening to withdraw 400 million funding to University of Columbia. So, it's just this kind of discussion here. So maybe just quickly sum out, for our viewers and listeners, what is the key issue here in terms of affirmative action, like in context of Malaysia and maybe in light of what Trump is doing.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with it started off with like the idea where there is discrimination. So there is because all this thing is based on the understanding that there's like racial preference. So I think in Malaysian context, I mean, obviously we are a rainbow nation where we have like different races. So there's that diversity, but I think the whole setup because of our like Kampong Baru and I mean like those sort of setup where there's like segregation of different races, then we begin to have like, hey, maybe certain groups are less preferred when it comes to employment or when it comes to education. So I think in Malaysian context, there has always been that sort of quota. I mean, obviously in the United States, it will be very different. I mean, as in it's more, I guess it's like I would say it reaches the peak when there is equality among like women also demanding like same rights as the men, same pay as the men. So you see all these things started off from like maybe Hollywood, and then you begin to have like, hey, even in sports, we also want to have like same play. I mean, same pay. But the thing is, I think people don't generally watch like women's sports as much. I mean, except for
Yeah,
gymnastics.
of course.
So I mean, like there are certain sports where, like, I mean, if you watch football, American soccer. So I think there is still certain preference that NFL people will still watch like men soccer. So it's in that sort of context. So, but what makes the whole Scotters decision so interesting is that because I think for the first time it is made so publicly known that, hey, just because you're from certain racial background, your points could actually be deducted. So you actually you were given a less preference to enter
Preferential,
university, and you're talking about like Ivy Leagues universities where a lot of Asians here, I mean in Malaysia, I mean a lot of people would strive to go into this sort of universities and only to find out, I can't enter because I'm of Asian descendant.
Yeah, I remember when we did that episode 2 years ago and Singing were just discussing, how if you are Asian, automatically you are deducted 450 points from SAT. It's just shocking, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
it
this is from
is.
Harvard, and you're supposed to be the pinnacle of education arena. But let me just kind of go back to another topic which is closer to home, and I think when I was talking to you just about what we should be talking, and you kind of make a very interesting point that in US, in Australia, yes, all these affirmative actions are for the minority, but here is for the majority. So I mean, I mean, everyone have different comment, but how would you describe the system as you see it? Because you are in a private setting. But yeah, I mean, let's talk as a Malaysian now.
Yeah. So I was discussing this with you a couple of weeks ago, and for some time it always struck me that we do have a kind of an interesting system here, which is at its core very systemic. And I tried to look up this fact that you mentioned just now, which is there is there any other nation in the world that actually prefers preferential treatment for the hegemony, the majority. And in fact, I couldn't really get any
Yeah.
data on that. So it seems like we are one of the, perhaps the only country in the world that actually does this. And to talk about affirmative action, what Lyra mentioned just now, the fact is that people want to level the playing field, right? And there's always this concept about inside or outside. And it's the concept that we want to make it equal so that everyone has a fair chance.
Yep.
You know, so at its core, it seems to be something that is right, it's good, it's valuable. But then to what end does the scale tip so that you seem to be overwhelmingly trying to manage or manipulate what the outcome is? So that becomes a very dangerous or slippery slope there, you
Yeah,
see.
absolutely.
And when it comes to Malaysia, we talk about affirmative action in terms of education, in terms of the financial, preference, in terms of the economic, the NEP, and all that sort. Even later, the NCP, the National Cultural Policy. So this is supposed to, give a kind of a balance, equal distribution to the economic sector. But I would say that some scholars have argued that this has done more harm than good. There's different kinds of opinions, like you said, Simon, which is basically trying to help a particular race group, to rise up to that level. But it goes into the whole issue of now there's this sense of entitlement, also there's this sense of, right, how much do we give so that it doesn't cause, the other end of the other minorities to also feel like now we are the ones that have to sort of fight to get this. So there's a whole host of issues that goes into this.
And of course, we are most familiar from the racial point of view. But Lara, you're just saying that now women also demand certain things. And I mean, the concept is very similar. We just, 8th of March, we just had the Women's Day, right? So I think the last episode we're talking about local political parties. So even the upcoming DAP election, they have a certain quota that the Central Committee must have 20% female participant, for example. So what do you think about this kind of thing? Let's say a company or your university board, you must have a minimum percentage of, I mean, we just use gender, because we basically, male, female is about 50-50 the whole world, right? So what do you both think about this? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Is this against meritocracy, or is this another kind of affirmative action? I mean, use gender as an example.
Well, I would say I think the origin of affirmative action has always been based on like certain assistance, that is certain equality, like what you're saying, in terms of like leveling the playing field. I mean, especially for the minorities. I mean, obviously it obviously evolved and extended to women. So I think all this thing, I can't help but begin to think, does it start from feminist movement? Isn't like at the very beginning, I mean, you were there to like actually help them, but eventually this whole feminist movement was being hijacked, and actually that's how I think it slowly evolved into like Black Lives Matter sort of foundation, as in where actually a lot of Black women were actually being, I mean, they were supposed to get like more help in the United States, and yet they were actually being kind of being put into that sort of entitlement bubble, where you begin to see like a lot of social issues that happen with this group of people. I mean, so I mean, I was like, just I can't help but think like, yeah, like what you mentioned, as in like to what end do we help this sort of people? So there is a lot of this tension, but I think the initiative itself is not a bad thing altogether. I mean, obviously you have certain industries that are more male dominated. So I mean, obviously if you're like great and there is like merit system, so I think women can be paid. I mean, if they can also get in that sort of same amount of revenue, so I think there should be, I mean, the idea is that it should be colorblind, as in like gender blind, in terms of how a certain income or certain pay is being given to, like, irrespective of the gender. So I think the starting point was good, but it's just that it has been hijacked, and like now we can't even begin to differentiate what do you mean by woke. Like people will be like, am I being awakened from something, certain ideology? So I think there's like a lot of that thing that has been started off from good point, yet it is being actually kind of being basically weaponized to just like go into a whole different ball game altogether. So I thought it's like, I can't I mean, I can't say. I mean, like construction industry, obviously there is
Very much male dominated,
very
right?
male dominated, but you can't deny that there are very, very good. I mean, if you want to like command respect with like say foreign laborers, I think men generally do it better. I'm not saying that it's like because you're like stereotyping, but men do generally do it better because they command like certain respect, and with certain culture, I think they only respect the men and they don't respect the women. So I think personally, I'm fine. I mean, even working in construction industry, I know like, okay, being a project manager is definitely not something that I aspire to be, but I prefer to work in an office, but I'm also expected to be paid like a certain amount because of the revenue that I can like generate. Yeah.
Yeah, since you mentioned this, so let me ask you, Xin Ying, because something quite related. This is in 2017. There was an engineer in Google. His name is called James Damore. And he came out with, because they used to have internal discussion board and things like that in a company. So he kind of brought out some studies to compare male and female engineer, because Google is a very much engineering-driven company. So he kind of just say that, male are better engineer, from a data point of view. Let's discuss. He just wanted a discussion, but then he was cancelled and he was fired, And but he later on his whole argument is that, look, there is an inherent difference between male and female. I mean, we talk about that all the time, right? We are all we all married with spouse and things like that. The dynamics are very, very different, right? And even in terms of shopping behavior and things like that.
Yeah.
Certain things are just hardwired. So he's just saying that, look, there are certain jobs which may be a specific gender. There are always exceptions. But what do you think about I mean, it's the same question that I put at the beginning, when you have, when you say that you must have a certain percentage of female force, yes, you want to encourage them in certain industry, but at the same time, you can just be putting people for the sake of putting people. So where is the balance for you?
So I think it's the same with, race, skin color, but if you talk about gender, actually, the whole issue in terms of how research or how the humanities started, I just feel like there is this kind of victim mindset that's going around with how they felt that they have always been the one that's oppressed and not given the opportunity. Yes, I do agree that in terms of history, let's talk about feminism, which started as a suffragette woman. They wanted to get votes, and that's all fair and fine. But it later becomes something that it seems to be very somehow demonizing in the way that they would think that, anything that has to do with masculine behavior, male, orientation.
I have to cancel that.
You have to just,
Feminism.
cancel that, or, you have to just sort of put it aside. And one would think that, hey, isn't it you're trying to highlight, why do you have to also downcast the other in order to put forth, what you wanted to promote? And that's completely just unfair. So if you're talking about women in terms of the workforce, of course, now people will say that, oh, this is a good company if you have quite a good gender distribution. But then if you are just putting people there for the sake of whatever gender or racial color that you're trying to fix in terms of the quota, then what's the point? Are you actually getting the job done? I mean, in the end, we are just looking for the outcome, and we need the results to speak for itself. So the quota is just trying to make things look nice. I guess a lot of these issues, I was reading some of the articles you sent me, and it struck me that a lot of these DEI criteria, they were there for a reason, yes, but people were adhering to them in a superficial manner. They were trying to sort of doing, so that it looks good aesthetically. And at the core, there is another kind of fear.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the article, because especially after Trump returned to the president office, many company, right? I mean, just look at some of the names here. I mean, look at the name: Bank of America, Citigroup, BlackRock, Deloitte, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Amazon, Google. It's almost like they're being coerced to go into that, because it's like, there's such a bad publicity if we don't adhere. And I get that a lot in Malaysia also. You see like Ben Negara, you see Companies Commission of Malaysia. They're trying to push all this kind of thing and say, I mean, of course, they did it with ESG first. ESG, of course, push for the green technology, sustainability. And so, in fact, they even want to put that as one of the criteria for lending. That if your ESG score, I don't even know how they're going to do that. If you are a certain score, you are more likely to get a borrowing from bank. So they will use that as a way to control. But I really agree with your point that, look, yes, we can, to be fair, we go back to history. Women were not allowed to vote. They were not in the workforce, not since before 200 years back. So they were really at a very disadvantaged stage. But then, yes, you want to promote them, but why should you put down the other side? Same with race, same with many other things. So, but another thing, of course, we talk about the corporate DEI, which is, I think recently, even because Women's Day, there's a lot of events, even they get some of the women leadership, and they're saying, now they want to promote flexi hour.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's a suggestion to say that flexi hour should be given to women because they have to take care of children.
Only women?
Yeah. and then, so this lady was saying, it's going to be very dangerous if we do that, because then all the men will kind of wash their hands and say, we don't need to take care of children now. It kind of goes both sides, right?
Right, yeah, which is interesting because I was talking to my student the other day on March 8th, which is Women's Day. I said, do you know what day is this? Women's Day. What about the Men's Day? Is there a Men's Day? A very innocent question that just came out. I said, there's no need for that. Which brings to the core of the question: why is this overemphasis on one thing for that particular day, and are people just doing it for the sake of it so that it looks nice? Yeah.
And of course, since I guess one of the way to look at this maybe is to look at different industry, right? Recently, of course, in United States, there's a lot of focus on the aviation. Because of DEI, there's a lot of increase in female pilot. Now, of course, there are actually studies to say that male are more suitable to be pilot because their thinking is very linear. It's like, I just want to get there.
Of course.
So that's them. But ladies will be like, okay, in between I can do many things. So, but of course, this is a very generic kind of study. But when we talk about aviation, regardless of gender or race or things like that, these are kind of like public security issue. Won't you want the most qualified person to fly your plane rather than you have a certain skin color, a certain gender, a certain age? So, it's like, someone who create your car and things like that, build your house. you don't want just anyone because of DI, they become your contractor, and later you get a house that may just collapse.
Yeah.
When we talk common sense like this, most people can agree, right?
Yeah. So you just get the person who is able to do the job the best, Yeah.
Now let's go back to the topic again, and I know this is going to be a bit more sensitive part of this conversation. Is really every time, this is just a political reality in this nation, that every time you have parties like UMNO and even in Sarawak, you get GPS, whenever they want to remain in control, they have to create what we call a siege mentality. That means they have to cause their base to feel like they're under attack. So this is what they use. So they always say the Malays are underprivileged and things like that. But when you look at every corridors of powers, from the royalty to the Bumiputra share to the number, the high-ranking judges, high-ranking civil servants, high-ranking policemen. They are all them, right? So, don't you find it's very absurd? But if you want to explain to people, how we can change this, how would you do that? And okay, you always think for a while. But 2 years ago when we did this recording, I think it was Shad Sadet who mentioned this, and I see if I can find a quotation. And Shad Sadet, because at that time, 2 years ago, what happened, just a very quick context, Prime Minister was saying that, we need to, I think during the dinner time, we're talking about how some of the matriculation now, they are open to non-Bumi already. So I think PMX at that time, he did say something to that effect, but then he had to add the final point, quota system will remain. So he's kind of like, in this show, we kept saying that he's a bit half-hearted, he doesn't dare to go all the way. But this is what Shad Sadet was saying. And he say, if you want to help people, you should take into all the factors, social, economic, the parents' background, curriculum, which city they come. You shouldn't discriminate based on religion, race. So he's not saying based on merits alone, because I believe both of you will agree that there should be some kind of help. But the issue is, how do we draw the line, right? So again, coming back to Malaysia, specifically education arena which you are in, and of course, Lyra, in your industry, you also have this issue, right? People from certain university you don't really want to hire because of affirmative action. I mean, if they go in easy, they might not be suitable. But what's your take? I mean, I know there are no simple and easy solution, but what do you hope to see change? I mean, maybe we should frame it in a more positive way. What do you hope to see? What are some of the things you think maybe our government, I mean, sometimes you want to wait for government, maybe you take for it, but even at the private sector level, at the personal level, what can be done? Maybe Xin Ying, you want to start first?
At the personal level, so
or even at your workplace, what do you hope to see? Maybe like university, you're a private university. I think from our conversation, the private university are not so directly impacted.
With the racial quota, not as much, basically.
But it is still there, It is still there, right?
I wouldn't say it is, well, perhaps because my discipline is a very niche area. So actually I teach...
If you can't do it.
Music, I teach music at...
you can't hide it, right?
UCSI University. And we do have a kind of audition requirements that, each student has to go through, and they have to exemplify a certain kind of level of proficiency in their performance level. But of course, the academic requirements is still there. That's sort of standard for every MQA, which is the Malaysian's Qualitative Assurance Framework. So there is this requirements that they had to adhere to. But interestingly, because of the subject nature, I would say that we really have more majority Chinese students. I seen Chinese race students with a very small sample of Malays and Indian students. So already we did not fit any kind of quota that is part of this national landscape. Yeah, so it really begs the question is that if you can do it, if you want to do it, and of course there is also the financial incentive as well. I would say most of our students come from a background of like upper middle class. It goes with the same understanding that if you need to learn this instrument for quite a long time, you need some sort of leverage with the paying, economic background. You need to be
taking
classes. Yeah,
high school or even primary school.
Exactly. So that naturally excludes a lot of students from a particular background, financial background, and that also means from a particular racial group as well. So we are quite overwhelmingly in that particular group. But if there is some students who are from, let's say, sort of minority, in our case, the Malay students or Indian, when we have certain discussion, it's quite common to have seminar discussion. I regularly just pose questions to them, and just get them to talk among each other. For example, one of the couple of things we talk in a postgraduate seminar discussion is about critical theory, which is a very difficult thing to actually explain to them in the first place. But also to say that, hey, we are in a university, overwhelmingly in the West, they are sort of favoring this kind of trajectory. But if you were to think about it, I want you to be a bit more nuanced to think about, is this something that would help, or would it in the end also cause more harm that we are trying to remedy? Yeah. So by my own personal effort, it's just opening up the discussion and talk about
So you
things.
talk about like critical race theory.
Critical race, critical theory.
Is that something big? Because critical race theory is very much
huge.
linked with DI. And
Yes.
I mean, at uni level, is it like heavily promoted?
Because a lot of the subjects that you teach, you are supposed to be very much understanding of what's the general trend nowadays in scholarship. So you would want to be informed of what people are researching, what people are writing about. So when I'm also teaching students, I try to include the latest discussions, and we are reading the latest articles. And this is just all over, underlining the entire way of how they're writing about certain things.
Yeah.
And even I was talking to you about certain sustainable development goals that were being promoted by the United Nations.
Yeah.
We are required to implement some of these goals in our lesson outcomes. So these things are good and fair. But if you are going to talk about gender equality, in terms of the humanities, it could very much be a very left socialist view of what feminism is, female empowerment and all that sort of stuff. And that, like what Lyra said, it's just the tip.
Yeah.
And then from then on, you go on to race. And now the latest is colonization, or decolonization, which is the post-colonial mentality. So basically, all of us who have been colonized, we are the ones that are the outsider. So we have to sort of make a stake and say, hey, what's our version of the narrative?
And I want to reject the foundation
Exactly.
of the
And
colonizer.
it's almost like overturning everything, the foundation that has been part of the bedrock.
That's really the foundation of critical race theory.
Yeah.
And go back to our earlier point, which is, I mean, you want equality, fine, but you shouldn't destroy people for the sake of equality. And so, I mean, you think about the feminist movement when it first came, of course, it's against the men, and then the feminists are kind of superseded by the LGB group, and then now the LG is superseded by the trans.
Exactly.
It's like every time you want to promote a group, it's almost like at the expense of another group, but why should it be like that?
Yeah.
Very interesting. So Lyra, what's your take on all this? I mean, I know we have spoken a lot on critical race theory, DEI, affirmative action, but what's your current distilled thought?
Well, I guess we can't really rely on government. I mean, because personally, I'm not pro like big government, because I felt like, I mean, if we have to rely on government for everything, I mean, even if it's like certain, because I think the biggest concern is that they are legislating morality. So I think in this context, there shouldn't be any further encroachment. So I think it will have to be like starting from the grassroots, where we begin to even just deal with the basic root issue where there is victim mentality, like what Xin Ying has mentioned. So in terms of like victim mentality, how do we deal with this group of people? I mean, how do we give them afford them certain help that they actually need and actually is beneficial and actually can cause them to stand on their feet? So I think there should be more private initiative. I mean, it's not just like a one weekend CSR sort of event. So I think even the HR should be looking into all this thing, rather than, hey, we should include more of these people. So like what you mentioned, like why should there be an in and out? So inside, you're either inside or you're outside. So I don't think there should be that sort of like clear segregation between who should be in, who should be out. But there should be like at the very core, how do we deal with all this fundamental issue? Hey, because at the end of the day, I mean, business exists to just become the economic entity, and then like entertainment, they exist to basically just perform for people. So I think when it comes to like DEI, critical race theory, so why should we give certain preference just because of like, hey, it's like we want to help them, but then actually we're helping them at the expense of themselves. So these minorities that you're trying so hard to help. So I think it's more like how do we begin to address the societal issue on victim mentality that sort of that gives rise to entitlement mentality in the first place. So I think all these things have to start from education, and how do we even begin to like go back into all these things. So I thought it's like what Charlie Kirk did in the United States with Turning Point USA. It's like he begins to challenge just a lot of the wrong mindset that we have.
A lot
like,
of assumption, right? And
exactly.
on the campuses.
So I think it's like that sort of assumption that we think we're entitled to certain things just because we started off like this, like just because our ancestors are maybe less better off. So, but if we don't, I mean, because then the whole thing, the whole argument can tilt not just into like gender, not just race. It could also go into like, hey, you are way better off. So it's like you were born with a silver spoon. Obviously, you can say all the things that you wanted, but poor people also have like that poverty mentality as well. So I think with that sort of thing, how do we actually, I mean, obviously I think the government will have to resolve like systemic corruption, systemic poverty sort of issue, but like on our level, I think it's like just like, I mean, having that sort of healthy discussion to how do we like get rid of all this thing? How do we have like certain initiative that we can just like within a neighborhood, within a community, how do we educate people to like, hey, we need to help each other out and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, just listening to both of you, I was just reminded again that in Malaysia, at least, the foundation is really the class war. It's like always trying to put either it's racial or now you look at our prime minister's favorite term now, mahakaya, right? And try to just say, those have it, even though you work hard for that, but you are not really entitled, because it's almost like it's a dishonest living. Now, I want to kind of go to another tangent, and maybe this is where we'll close the game. Do you think that now, of course, we kept saying that people should explore, people should pursue what they want, but do you agree that maybe certain people are just better at certain things? And this is really, you look at the foundation of Malaysia, the founding of Malaysia. Right at the beginning, there was this concerns, like the Chinese are doing all the business in town, the Indians are managing the estate, the Malays are just fishermen and doing agriculture. And Tunku Abdul Rahman was telling the British that we need to have some sort of affirmative action for. And I think it was Lord Reed who said, well, it cannot work for long term. Then he kind of pushed Tunku to come out, and Tunku said 20 years. And we know 60 plus years already, we are still doing that. So what do you think about this? It's like, I mean, we talk about certain industry, accounting line, it's Chinese like most of the time. And not to say you don't have other race and things like that. Then of course you talk about civil service, you talk about police, it's all Malay and things like that. And it's very interesting, right? I mean, you talk about, the other day I was at Selayang Mall, and the whole committee was all Indian, and they are laughing about Indian specific industry, security guard, auto gate, the security gate. They say, oh, you want to buy this? Only the Indian was, it's almost like stereotype and funny. But at the same time, what do you think? Is there any validity in this? Like certain people, because of their history, because of their heritage, maybe they are just better, or we should just kind of do a level playing field, but without destroying. What will be your preferred approach? I mean, we talk about just now even West Malaysia and East Malaysia. It's like there's another kind of protectionism, right? But kind of share both your thoughts, and then we can kind of wrap up today.
Well, I think personally, I'm more in favor of, I guess maybe because I marry an Indian. I'm
David was supposed to join us today, right?
yes.
next time. He's right here.
So no, I think personally, I'm more inclined to like why can't we cultivate a society that is like literally colorblind? I mean, because I was like just listening to like Charlie Kirk in just having a discussion with Gavin Newsom. Exactly, like it's so bizarre. But the thing is, like, who would have known that like Gavin Newsom's son would be like so interested in Turning Point USA? I mean, but basically you have like a young group of people that basically they are very much conservative leaning, and you'll be very surprised. It's like the baby boomers are the one that are super liberal, like super leftist, socialist leaning.
More indoctrinated, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. So
More
I guess
brainwashed.
at the end of the day, it goes back to how we are educating the people. So it's like, if you could have like a community where everyone don't look at each other as different color, kind of like Indonesia, where they don't generally identify themselves as like, oh, I'm Chinese, I'm like certain races. So I think I can only imagine like what would happen to Malaysia if each one of us just call ourselves Malaysian. Like, we don't really identify ourselves as like a certain race, but I don't think that diminishes the culture or our flavor of like certain race. But if we could just take that, like, we don't look at things with a colored lens, and I felt like that would be the beginning of the first step where we're moving away towards all this. Because I think at the end of the day, it's more like, hey, who is being more preferred here? So I think we have to take that whole equation out of the way so that people can actually begin to think, hey, what if all of us having that same education opportunity? I mean, these days when the kids going to international school, I think like the Chinese are as banana as they could be, and then like maybe some Malays are totally they totally can't speak that language. But yet there is also discrimination among their own races as well. So I think what if we could like just having that safe environment where the young generation could actually be free to express themselves and actually without looking at any form of color at all. I think that could be the beginning of like us paving a way or a pathway for like a brighter future where it is like everyone is more merit based rather than just having to look at certain gender, I think you kind of like just have to take that whole thing out of the way so that it's not like they are being indoctrinated in the first place. So it's like they don't even have that in their mind. So I think we have to like find a way to like just take that whole thing out.
Yeah. It's almost like we're trying to rewrite. You know, if we have an ideal version of what could Malaysia be, we're trying to rewrite history from the point of eradicating all these divisions. You know, like what Simon, you're saying about our history, the issue with, well, not issue, the categorization of race really came in because during the colonial rule, they're trying to put us into boxes, and we have to take, you know, Malay, Chinese, Indian, and then you have another one, Dan Lion.
Yeah,
you know.
correct.
So who else does not fit into the three major ones? They fit into this. And there's this other term that I thought of. It's not racism; it's racialization. You know, which is very different from racism. But at its core, it's the racialization of all these different
You stereotype people?
areas. Yeah, in terms of the industry, and all these stereotypical answers or this statement came from the point of because of the background, because of the upbringing, because of the education system that actually interfered with how people think, and it's presented in a particular way. So the data shows us that it's like this. So, but what if we remove ourselves from what, you know, this essentialist, or, you know, inherently you think that, oh, this person would have to be like this. What if we remove ourselves from that kind of lens, and just to look at things at the core, you know, instead of trying to be determined ahead of whatever the surrounding is. And then it goes back to a very interesting example that I thought of when I was illustrating, you know, some of the damages that this critical race theory is doing. It's supposed to help us look at racial preference as something that's empowering, but in the end, it is like it's damaging to both sides.
Yeah.
You know, for example, if you have a situation where two person walk into a grocery store, you know, one is a African American black, the other one is white guy. Who should you go and help first? so either way, you are being seen as the bad person.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, you help the person who is the white first. You say, oh, you are preferring him because of, you know, racial preferences, white supremacy, and all that sort of stuff. You know, if you help, or you go tend to the other guys, and then people will say, oh, are you accusing him of, you know, some fishiness, or, you know, so it's like looking at race critically. You're trying to find things to pinpoint and
First come, first serve.
to problematize,
needs.
you know. So it's like, damned if you this, damned if you do that, you know. So that's not really helping us in terms of leveling the playing field, you know. So it ideally, it's kind of hard when we have been so far off. But I believe there is always a next generation, and the hope that comes from how we could change things at the core level.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, hearing both of you, and you know, it's like the education has to change, of course. I mean, people have been arguing, you know, vernacular education, is it good or bad? You know, those kind. I mean, we're not getting into there today, but it has to start somewhere. But of course, the other thing is, I mean, if we go back to look at the American example, you see all the corporate giants who dropped DEI. It is because of two things. First, Trump issued an executive order to kind of say DEI is illegal from the federal government point of view. Then, of course, you have the Supreme Court decision. So at the end of the day, I mean, I do agree. You know, the grassroots. You know, we have to educate people. Don't you know, the term you use, racializations. You know, it's like don't do that and things like that. But it takes time. You know, we're all so used to it. I mean, it's like we're all kind of like, I think both of you are millennial. I'm like just before millennial, but we're kind of in the same boat, right? We were so used to this stereotype. Not easy. I mean, even though we say we want to be different, but subconsciously you'll be like, oh, this race will do that. You know, it's just like that. So maybe, you know, maybe not up to us. It has to be the next generation, I guess. But anyway, our time is kind of running out. Do you have any lasting thoughts you want any one or two additional comments you want to kind of put in terms of affirmative action maybe in Malaysia?
Well, I guess being an educator, it really comes to the point that we have to be so nuanced in the way of understanding things, and not to be completely. And the other thing is our emotions. Sometimes we are very driven because of what we think, and we're so passionate about it because we are driven by our emotions that tell us of a certain narrative. Even certain things that happen in history. Can we look at it in a very neutral perspective? Can we?
So would you say it's like
it?
a bit of prejudice?
Yeah, there is definitely that. And we are so colored by how we see and view certain things, and of course the media that you consume. Looking at particular issue, people are so used to their version of the narrative, and right now in this social media kind of landscape, we are so ingrained in our own bubble.
Yeah.
So people never really look beyond of what their community is really thinking, and that could be a point dangerous. So I guess at the really core level is really to be exposed to different kinds of narratives. Yeah.
Yeah, I like what you were saying. It's in like the exposure to media. I think that's also one thing that definitely needs a lot of restructuring or revamping altogether. So I think if Malaysians generally, I mean, if we would be a bit more open-minded to just consume media from like various sources. I mean, you can make that sort of comparison, and you can begin to even just formulate your own thinking. I think people should begin to kind of like take ownership of what they are thinking of, or what they are like just begin, how do they derive certain ideas. So I think all this thing comes from how you are consuming the media, or are you just like a Facebook sort of person, you just get news from like all form of Facebook. Because I mean, I was just talking to my colleague where I say, how good would it be, if all the banks are free to like just regulate their own interests and impose their interests. And then in her mind, I think because she's more Chinese educated, so in her mind she'll be like, what do you mean? Like we must have control. Like, so I think
it'll be the end of the world.
Exactly. So it's like at the end of the day, it goes back to what you're consuming. I mean, obviously your upbringing and things like that, but if people are just not so I guess just leaning towards one media or the other, then when they have like a bit more open mind, then they will begin to like just formulate their ideas, and even just begin to like cultivate that culture of like open discussion, healthy discussion. And I think that will really just be a very good start.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah, I guess to wrap out, listening to you, Lyra, we've been doing this a lot in this show, is that there's basically a narrative out there. There is, you want to call them establishment, you want to call them the cultural globalist or whatever term. They want a certain outcome. And that's why the critical theory, all those things are part of the whole design. But I totally agree with both of you that, people need to, like Xin Ying was saying, be neutral, be open about new possibilities. And I think that requires people to be much more discerning. See, one of the things about the media, and I'm not sure if you both noticed, is that if someone like Charlie Kirk, they will say, oh, this is a far right person. But when the far left liberal, they will never describe them. They will just say this is a objective journalist. Like CNN is totally objective. So it's those kind of things that will help us to kind of, no, we're not saying they are good or bad. We're just saying that they have a hidden agenda. And if they don't want to call themselves liberal left, why? It's because they don't want you to know that is what they're pushing. And so, but anyway, that's another topic for another day. So I think it has been a great conversation. Yeah. So seeing we will want to bring you back again for other topics. So I think there are many topics we can kind of go about, right?
Totally.
I'll be totally happy.
Yeah, DI is just something that is not easy to discuss over a short period of time. But do let us know what you want us to talk more, especially from affirmative action, and maybe we'll come back. Maybe next time David will come.
Audition.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all the time we have for today. Bye-bye for now.
All right, bye.